welcome to the chat with Andrew Weiler. Andrew was kind to accept my invitation, although he doesn't know me well, because I happened to watch him on his one of his webinars about pronunciation, and I fell in love with his webinar. It was beautiful. I'm especially interested in pronunciation myself to improve my own pronunciation and teaching pronunciation to everyone. And so is Andrew, as far as I know, but he's more than that. Maybe, Andrew, you could introduce yourself for our viewers and they get to know you.
Sure. Merhaba. So,
Merhaba.
first of all, so, my name's Andrew Weiler. I've been teaching English, I could say, all my life. So I've been in the industry for over 40 years. So a long time, which is good in some ways.
You're really experienced.
Yeah. Well, I've been in the industry, and why I say that, because most of the time I was teaching adults English, either at a low level, beginners to intermediate to advanced, specialist classes, pronunciation, grammar, writing, academic English. But also, as well as that, I've trained teachers at Melbourne University for a number of years. And I've also been the head of a large department, English language department of 100 teachers for 7 years. And I've written some books, which probably we'll talk about a bit later on. So I'm pretty passionate about them
now, if you wish to.
Sure.
So anytime, actually. I don't want to limit you. Anytime you could just, you are the specialist here. I'm going to learn lots of things, just like my viewers. Please feel free.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So I've been pretty passionate about language learning and teaching for all my life, virtually. And that started off when I was very young. In year 7 and year 8, I was asked to, in school to learn French. So we had French, and I became one of the best in the class. Wow. And I really loved the French. And then we changed school. And by the end of the year of year 9, I became one of the worst in the class. So this gave me a really good lesson, which I've never forgotten, about the fact that it is not just who we are that determines how good we are at something. It is what we do. Mm-hmm. And, I could, at that time, because I was young, I blamed the teacher, of course. But really, as an adult, you can blame your teacher and your courses, everything else. But ultimately, it really depends on ourselves what we do, because as adults, we can decide to do this or that. We don't have to follow.
And sorry for interfering, but I think this is the core of your teaching philosophy too, right? Because I had the chance to read some of your articles, follow your channel, follow your website. I got some information about you, a bit of information, and you're a great teacher. I see that, and you're a great learner too. And could you tell us about the languages you know?
Sure. Well, first of all, my first language is Hungarian, and English is my second language. Mm-hmm. So you could say I've learned English, but really I'm cheating a little bit, because I was pretty young when we came to Australia. In fact, I was 5 years old when we came out. But, in those years, there was no English classes. So we were just thrown into school and you sink or swim. Mm-hmm. And really, all my friends, all the people that we knew, we all swam. There was never any doubt about the fact we'd learn English. So my sister, who was 11 years old, she's also, you couldn't tell that English is her second language. And so that was the first language. And then I've learned a bunch of languages as part of my education for myself of what it is to learn a language. Mm-hmm. Chinese, Vietnamese, Spanish. I learned a bit of Turkish, in fact.
Really?
Short course. And then I've learned Indonesian as well. And in fact, I've taught Indonesian. So it's been interesting for me because, it's one thing to teach a language, but really you have to understand very clearly in yourself what it's like to learn a language and what are the problems we face as learners. Because until you learn something yourself for yourself, you can't really be. I believe you can't really be teaching it because it's just a nonsense, really.
Yeah.
So I took I kept learning languages to make sure that I stayed in touch with the whole problem of how learning languages.
Great. Yeah, I agree with you. You put yourself in your students' shoes, and sometimes as a teacher, I observe that in myself. Forget the point of view of your students. Sometimes you try to teach very fast, for example. But when I try to learn German and some Arabic, I noticed that I need to be slow. So this is unfair to my students, being fast, expecting them to learn quickly, and so on. I agree. I totally agree with you in that. So, Andrew, you've got some books as well, right? Could you please talk about your books?
Yeah. Well, the first I decided after so many years, I decided actually in 2011 that I have to write down some of the things I've come to. So the first book I wrote was called Language Learning Unlocked. And that book is all about learning languages, basically. It's not just English, every language, because, whatever language you're learning, the principles are the same. Every language has got its particular problems, whether it's the grammar or the pronunciation or the tones. There's always something that every language has got its difficulties with. It's just the nature of languages, yeah. But the way we learn it is identical in many, many ways. Sure. The thing, because in Australia we have we're a bit lucky here in that it's a migrant population, so we have people here from probably every country in the world. I mean, we're people here from everywhere: South America, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe. So I've taught, I think, people from, I reckon, must be 70, 80, maybe 90 countries. And so the thing that I've come to, the conclusion I came to, is that no matter what is your politics, what is your color, what is your religion, what is your gender, we are all the same. We've all got the same human problems. Our loves, our fears, our worries, money, all these things are human problems. And we all learned our first language the same way, more or less. I mean, no one taught us our first language. We all learned it. So we're all the same, despite the fact people try to divide us and say we're all different. I mean, what I've seen was all the same. And so in this book, Language Learning Unlocked, that's what I explored, this whole thing that we basically are all the same. And the way we approach languages as an adult or as a late teen can vary in different ways, but ultimately the only way you're going to learn a language to speak it, and I'm talking about speaking, not just reading and writing, which is another problem, but we're talking about speaking now, which is really I think it's really in my opinion, it's like the platinum or gold standard, because I mean it's the most difficult part of language to learn, because you can't think about it. Like when you're reading and writing, you can think about it, which tense, which verb, which in speaking, there's nothing. You just have to jump in and speak. And so that's the thing that it came to me, that how we learn our speaking is all the same. In a sense, if you can't hear something, you'll never say it.
Sure.
Right? So you put it another way, the level of our listening determines the level of our speaking. So if our speaking is really, for different reasons we can talk about later, is not that great, then our speaking is never going to be that great. It's just impossible. No matter how much grammar you study, how many schools you go to, how good your teacher is, until you improve your listening, your speaking is not going to rise above that level. It's just too difficult.
And at this point, could we start to focus on our main topic, why people get stuck and struggle with pronunciation? Would you like to dwell on that?
Sure. So the main reason people get stuck, and I mean at the very heart, at the very core of it, is that people are doing the wrong thing. Like I'll give you a practical example. If you try to go through the wall, wherever you are in your room you're in, and you're trying to, and there's no door, you're trying to use your hands, and you're just trying to claw at the wall. I mean, you can work there probably for a year, and you still probably won't get through, because you're doing the wrong thing. You're using your hands. Get some tools or find a door or something. And so, because pronunciation is a skill, and it's not knowledge, it's a skill. you have to learn how to do it. Now, if you're learning the wrong way, you just can't get to it. And that's the part of the problem that I think that, unfortunately, in the school system, we haven't been taught that. We've been taught that pronunciation is more like knowledge, that you study the pronunciation and you try to memorize the pronunciation, you practice it in a very limited way, and then by some magic, it's going to happen, when you start speaking. But really, because it's a skill, I'll give you an example. I have a grandson that I was watching the other day playing basketball. This was quite a while ago. Anyway, he just learned to bounce the ball. And so he took a long time to learn to bounce the ball. I mean, the ball was going this way and that way and the wrong height, you can imagine. And so finally, he's got to the point where he was actually able to bounce the ball. Some time, right? And then when he learned to bounce the ball, the next step was start walking. Now you can imagine you're not going to walk fast when you're just starting to learn to bounce the ball.
Sure.
So he was walking very slowly, and the ball started going this way and that way because you had to angle your hand at the right angle so the ball keeps coming up, goes in the same speed you're going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step after that was walk fast. And so every step took a time to master, right? There is no rushing it. If you don't master the first step, you will never get to the second step. And if you don't master the second step, you'll never get to the third step. And that's pronunciation. Pronunciation, the principles of learning pronunciation is exactly the same. If you can't master a single phoneme, like, for example, a, and for first language, the at doesn't exist, or you can't master the th sound like in the, because in your language doesn't exist, until you learn to master that as one sound in some combination you can do it in, there's no point trying to say words. There's no point trying to put into sentences. It's because that's the same thing as running or being fancy with playing a basketball. So it all has to be step by step. And that's probably one of the things that people don't understand. And that's one of the things people do wrong, and teachers included, and in classes they do it, is that they don't understand that it has to be step by step. And if you don't do step by step, it's impossible to master it adequately. You might somehow get something close, you might somehow sound okay, the accent might sound weird, or you might be intelligible, but because you haven't mastered that in the very foundational level,
is it true for all? Sorry, is it true for all levels and all ages? You mean? Are you suggesting this to be implemented only on young learners or adult learners?
No. For example, most of my work now is with advanced learners, people who speak nearly as good as you, some even a little better than you.
Thank you.
But not many. I mean, your English is really good, but I'm just saying I work with people who are at a really high level, and they asking me to help with their accent. That's one of the things I work with. Other things, expression. There's different things I work with, but I get them to work in exactly the same way. Because if you, at any level, want to fix a problem, you have to go back and find out what is the foundational issue that is causing this problem. Mm-hmm. Like it's and the same thing, for example, with Roger Federer as a tennis player. If he wants to change something in his stroke, he has to go back to the very basics of how he holds the thing and get hold of maybe that the way he's holding it is wrong, right? So you go back to the foundational thing and you build up the steps to the point where you're able to use it spontaneously and creatively when you're playing tennis or when you're speaking English, right? So this principle holds true whether you're at a beginner level in a school or an intermediate level or any level. If you want to master any skill, it's important to recognize that there are steps in learning any skill. It's the same like driving a car, dancing, you name any practical skill, and pronunciation, and I would suggest to you speaking English is basically a practical skill. It's just the language is more complex. Pronunciation is purely a practical skill, all about using your breath, and other bits and pieces around, right? But that's what it is. It's a practical skill.
Is it also valid for those learners whose ears are good? They're good at music. They're good at listening to music. I had one student. She was listening to foreign songs, English songs. I mean, in our case, and her pronunciation was good. Not perfect, of course, but It was good. So, would you suggest listening to music? Would it be good, or still are you suggesting to take necessary steps, step by step, and then get better at pronunciation?
Okay, so with the person, for example, that you're describing, or anybody else at any level, another principle that is holds true, apart from the fact that listening is critical, number one, and number two, I've talked about now this whole notion of steps, is that you have to identify the issue, right? Somebody has to identify the issue. Now, ultimately, at the higher levels, it's the person has to slowly get to the point where they can identify their own issues. So, for example, in listening to you and you're listening to me now, I mean, I can hear that your English is really good, but there are some Turkish elements still to your English.
Yes.
So if you wanted, for argument's sake, to make your English sound to the next level, which it's up to you, because you don't really need to, because your English is completely adequate for
I
most
do want.
purposes, then the key is for you to identify what one sound, I'm not saying generally, not saying a word, what one sound can you hear that I'm using that is different to what you're using? That's where it starts. So if you can't identify that, it's really difficult to move on. So people say, listen to music. Well, fine, listen to music and you can do all these things, or copy somebody saying, like shadow speaking, what people talk about, or all these things are fine, and you may improve by doing that. In my opinion, it's a hit and miss. For some people, it works really well, and I've seen some people who've done really amazing things with that technique, because somehow their own skills are so good that they're able to use their skills to actually to do what's required. But some people whose skills aren't that great, they will listen to, for example, we listen to, and they can't hear any difference at all. They can't hear it. They just keep saying what they're saying. Everything is the same. Yeah, my English is fine, thank you. What have I got to improve? Nothing. And so, because they can't hear the difference, right? So that's the critical thing, is that to be able to hear what is different between what I say and what somebody else is saying. And if you can hear something, then to grab it and think, okay, what's the difference? Is it happening with all words in all situations, or is that one particular word for some reason, because of its phonetic environment, I'm doing something weird with it? And it happens a lot. And I know in many languages, for example, the sound can be completely consistent, and I put it between two other consonants if it's a vowel, and somehow something changes. And the influence is from the first language, right? And I think they're saying the right thing, but in fact, there's some kind of weird twist going on. And again, the person has to identify it. And that requires listening, or somebody else from the outside telling you. But at the highest levels, really high levels, so I have people I coach, I got to the point where I'm saying, listen, your English is really good, and the kind of differences we're talking about is so small. I could, if I worked, identify, but if you want to keep improving, you have to learn to identify it yourself. And that's what we work on, how to identify these problems, because that's the key to get to the highest of high levels, where your English is indiscernible from anybody else in your environment. The only person who can do it is you. No one else can do it, right?
Okay, yeah, you would tell me about my pronunciation because this is almost your native language. And what can I do to identify my own mistakes or errors or whatever you call it?
Okay.
If I don't
So
know.
it's. I mean, the thing to start off with is put all your energy in focusing. I mean, in this environment, it's a bit hard because it's a bit of tension, and you obviously listen to what I'm saying, and your audience is there. I mean, so it's too difficult. But if you want to go home, for example, listen to some kind of podcast or some kind of something or other you listen to, that's easy and shouldn't be difficult. I mean, that's the other thing. If you're trying to learn something like improve pronunciation, don't go listening to some philosophy lecture because that's just it's got to the content just gets in the way. You want something easy like a soapy or something that's no stress on your brain. It's just a simple thing to listen to, and then listen and see. Well, can I hear anything? What can I hear? Can I hear any one thing that sounds different to me?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can take a time, but that's the trick. Can I hear anything at all? It's different. And then if you work at it, my suspicion is you might find something. And if you don't, you need to get some guidance, because it means your hearing is not focusing on the right areas. And so, which brings me to another area that I'll talk about very briefly, is that I talk about listening. When I talk about listening, it's not just listening. Listening is like, if you turn on the radio or the TV, we have different channels. We've got this channel, we turn the station, we get that channel. Turn another station, we get another channel, right? So we've got these different channels. So listening is like that. So one channel in learning or English or another language, one channel is meaning. So now you're listening to my meaning, I'm sure, like 100%, 99% of your attention is on my meaning.
Mm-hmm.
But you can change the station.
Oh,
I'm going on rhythm.
I see.
So if you listen to rhythm, you can't be listening properly to the meaning, because if you're doing that, your brain is not focused highly enough. And so if you focus your listening highly, you can, for example, just focus on phonemes, on vowels, and that's a station. And I've done this for myself in learning other languages. When I listen to people, is, you know, if I'm listening to the meaning, I can't be listening to the pronunciation or the phoneme. I certainly can't be listening to the tones. I can't be listening to the rhythms. So each of these has its own station, its own channel. And so to improve any aspect of pronunciation, you've got to choose your channel and work at that channel, not the other channels.
I really like your analogies.
Sorry?
I really like your analogies, you know, swimming analogy, you know, the station thing.
Well, it's good because I think this kind of, I've learned to do that because I've discovered that different people learn in different ways. And some people, you tell them a little story and, oh yeah, I get that. You tell them it's a long explanation, right? And then, what are you talking about?
This is my style, I think. Yeah, I loved your style. Some people may argue, do we have to be native-like? Do we have to really have to improve our pronunciation? What's the use? What's your answer to this question?
I mean, it depends on your purpose, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. It comes back entirely, it's an individual thing, right? How good do you want to be? And so ultimately, you know, I think you can only become really good at something is if you learn to enjoy it, and it becomes like a game, right? It can't be study and hard work and I've got to do another hour of English tonight and I've got to memorize all these words. I've got to do all this is just the wrong kind of work, and people's energy run out. Your passion dries up because it's passionless, that kind of work.
Yeah.
The passion comes from when you enjoy something, you want to keep going back to it. So as long as somebody's enjoying learning, you can keep improving if you've got the time. But it all comes back to priorities. So if you've got, for example, 3 kids running around at home and you've got a really big job and, you know, you've got tennis at night time, I don't know, all these things go on, English can become a very low priority.
Yeah.
In some situations, it can be high priority. So it depends. It's an individual thing. I don't think necessarily that you don't have to get native like. It's just, I mean, for me, it's just an interesting game. I love the game. It's just a game.
I think we can put it this way too. You know, good pronunciation is good speaking. Good speaking is good listening. And when you speak and listen well, you can have fun learning a language. So when we come to your point, if you don't have anything to say, I have one more question. While learning pronunciation, do learners have to learn the IPA chart? What's the role of the IPA chart? Is it important to know it? I mean, you know,
I personally think it's a distraction. You know, I know people, I've come across a lot of people who know the IPA really well, and their pronunciation is woeful. The IPA doesn't guarantee good pronunciation, right? The only thing that guarantees good pronunciation is good listening. So, for example, you see the symbol of, for example, you know, the TH, you know, symbol in IPA, right? So you know the symbol, but if you're saying it the wrong way, how's the IPA going to help you? You know, I don't understand.
You know, sometimes our brain plays tricks on us, you know. I mean, somebody says a word, but you misunderstand it. Your brain wants to understand it the way it wishes to. When you say a word, for example, I teach the word soup to my students, especially fourth graders. They insist on pronouncing it as shoop. And I say, I never said shoop. Nobody has ever said shoop. How did you come up with this pronunciation? I think sometimes we need to show them the symbol. This is sh. If you see the difference, you may hear the difference as well. Do you agree with that point?
Well, when I work with people with pronunciation, if there's a problem, I'll work at it from the back door rather than come straight down the road. So, for example, I might try a different word. For example, like in see, right? So, for example, see, S-E-A or S-E-E, if they say she rather than see, then there's a different problem going on, and they're misinterpreting that particular phonetic thing, right? So the next thing I would do is to find out, can they actually physically say see? So, for example, I might say a word like so. See if they can say the word so. If they can say the word so, it means they know how to say it. So the issue, first of all, to find out is, one, can they say it at all? If they can't say it, and the problem is that there's some, because in the first language doesn't exist, for example, that can happen, then the thing is to work at being able to say it. So how do you say a s rather than a sh? And that's all about where your tongue is, right? That's all it is. It's about where your tongue is. And so once they can say it, then I start playing with this thing of being able to say with different, so is it si, si, so, sa? So I just put different vowels to it. And so slowly, as we start building up the basics, again, going back to the basics, like bouncing the ball, like C can't, an S can't be said by itself, it must be with a vowel. Then finally, I will come back to suit. But I only come back to it once I know they can say, like they can say si and sa and so. If they can't say si and sa and so, su is a 3 phoneme word. It's going to be more difficult than a 2 phoneme word. Like Sue, for example, exactly. the name of a girl, that's why I would start. Can you say Sue? If they can say Sue, we're on the road. They got it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question of taking the steps and see if they can do the basic one. And that's a key, which comes back to what I was saying before, this whole notion of skills. You've got to find out if they got the first step. And if they got the first step, great. Can you do the second step? Oh, awesome. And let's do the third one. Oh, this is where the problem is. And then I'd find out that's where the issue I've got to work on. We've got to work on it together.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to talk about your book, 4 Essential Steps to Master Pronunciation in Any Language. Very briefly, can you summarize them for us so that it can show some guidance, some way to our viewers, and they can start from somewhere?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a big question? I'm sorry.
No. The first, I mean, it comes back to the first thing I was saying before, is that you have to find the problem, the issue. Mm-hmm. If there's nothing to deal with, then, and this is one thing I'll say in terms of this, when you're fixing a skill, there's no point picking up random steps to fix. Find something, even at a low level. A beginner student has got problems, right? No matter what level you're at, there's always going to be issues, right? So find the issue. The first thing is to find the issue, right? That's the first thing. And then the next step is you've got to be able to somehow produce something that sounds like what you heard. That's the next step. You've got to be able to produce. If you can't produce it, then there's no point going any further. And 3, the better you produce it, the better it is. And again, the idea is that you're trying to work at the smallest levels. So, for example, it's a vowel. You can say a vowel by itself. Then you can increase it over time and put a consonant with it. And then the next thing, which is difficult for everybody, is to maintain it. So maintenance is about, for example, because you can bounce the ball once, it doesn't mean you can keep bouncing the ball.
Sure.
Right? Put it in that analogy again. So can a person maintain that? And in pronunciation, it's the maintain next to all different consonants. So, for example, if you can say A, can you say pay, bay, day, fay, lay, say? Or can you say aim, ate, ache,
Yes.
ace? So these are the things that can you say to all these environments. And if you can say it in all the environments, you're getting some skill. And then you've got to be able to test it and see whether you're maintaining it, and always be attentive. When I put it next to a new sound, did the quality degrade? If the quality degrades, you've got to go back to the basics. What's the basic sound? And that, if you're teaching it, the teacher is the one that controls that. If you're learning by yourself, you need to have really good self-awareness. And it takes time to develop that and self-control. Because I've worked with people really high-level English, and they all of a sudden, a bit like that suit and shoot thing you were saying before, that all of a sudden they slip back into the old system because they're not paying full awareness, not paying full attention to the problem, and they slip back into the old habit. And so they have to be really attentive that they didn't slip back into the old one. And so that means being attentive and maintaining it. And then the fourth step really is being able to incorporate what you've learned into phrases and then into sentences. Because these are all steps, skill development steps. So if you can say the word by itself or the sound in a word, you put it into a phrase. For example, suit, I like suits. Now, if you can say I like suits and it sounds really good, great. The suit he's wearing is not as good as the suit I wore last week. That is a more difficult thing to control and make sure you're saying the right pronunciation. But if you can control it at the more difficult levels as you go up the scale, you'll be able to finally be able to use it when you're speaking spontaneously.
And things are changing at the fourth level, actually. Connected speech and rhythm, intonation comes into place.
Absolutely.
This is
It gets
another
much more
point.
complicated. A lot more. It's a lot more balls to juggle. It's again a bit like playing basketball. If you go and play with a bunch of people, so many things are going on. Unless you've created the really good basic skills, your skills are going to fall apart when you go into a game. Right? That's what happens. And it's, it all shows up how well you've created the foundations when you start playing the game or when you start speaking.
Exactly. And thank you. Yeah, of course, we have a lot of questions to ask you, but we have limited time. I know that. And you are a really busy teacher. And I had to organize the thing because we have to, take appointments. I saw your time schedule. It's really busy. And that's all I have to ask. If you wish to, you could also talk about EnglishConfidenceUnlock.com, strategies in languagelearning.com. And if you have any final remarks, please inform us. We'll be happy to hear you.
Sure. Yeah, so I as you mentioned, Kenan, I've got two websites that I work with. One is more on a general language learning one, which is strategiesinlanguagelearning.com. And that one is the one I started. And there's another one which is English Confidence Unlocked, which is more specifically in the whole area of English, focusing on English. So I different times I post different articles. On the strategies one, I've got over 100 different articles there, which I've written over many, many years. So the other one, English Confidence Unlocked, it hasn't got that many articles, but I'm sort of working at it slowly. I've been working more recently at developing some coaching systems for people at high levels, because up till now I've been working one-on-one with people, and that really is at a high level, that's what's really required. But I've now worked out, because in the past 2 years I've coached something like 50 people one-on-one for either 3 months or 6 months periods. I've got to the idea that even though each of them have got different problems, I covered the same thing with all of them just about, which is really interesting. So I've been working at developing some kind of program that enables me to work with more people at the same time, because I have a lot of demand for my services, and so that's what I've been working on more lately.
Thank you for your time. Really, I know that, and it's
Yeah.
I really appreciate your being here now. Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure. It's a great talk. It's great talking with you. So teşekkürlerim.
Rica ederim.
Sweet.
Önemli değil, or it's not important.
Cool.
All right. Thank you very much for being here again. And I'd like to watch your webinars in the future. I believe I have a lot to learn from you, especially in terms of pronunciation. Thank you again.
Okay. All the best with your endeavors and your teaching and what's going on in Turkey. Another world over there, different to this world over here.
Yeah, especially in these pandemic days.
Yeah, it's weird times we live in. Very unusual.
So you're okay, right? You're healthy.
Oh, yeah,
around
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. Inshallah, stay like that way.
Wow, you're great at learning Turkish too.
Inshallah is not Turkish, is it? It's Arabic, isn't it?
Yeah, Arabic. Allah is God. Insha is building, making. If God lets. Yeah.
I've got many Muslim friends here, so I've been well educated in the whole area.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Goodbye then.
All the best.
Hope to
Take
see you
care.
again anytime.
Okay. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Ciao.